I've never imagined that people could be as evil on such a scale. Sure, the way I got involved in this particular movement and with my concern regarding vaccines, and first of all, specifically thimerosal containing vaccines, is when my son sustained a vaccine injury when he was received his 15-month shots. He received 5 different vaccinations at 15 months while he had an active ear infection. And so that was very, very difficult. When the information started coming out of the CDC that there was not a relationship between vaccinations and thimerosal exposure and autism, then as a scientist and with my statistical background, I went back through that information and I saw significant flaws with that information. And by the time then the Institute of Medicine held the final meeting of the Immunization Safety Review Committee. That was the meeting was in February of 2004. And then I remember the report coming out in May of 2004 and saying, based on these 5 really fatally flawed epidemiology studies, that there was no relationship between thimerosal and autism, and that no more research, essentially, it's not the exact verbiage in the report, that essentially no more research should be done in this particular area in terms of autism causation, period, to move on. And that really activated me because I knew that there was a reason that the Institute of Medicine and that specific committee only looked at those studies. And I knew that the CDC was behind it, and they were telling them specifically, you will not find a relationship between thimerosal containing vaccines and autism, period. And that was really the start of it. And I had submitted a few Freedom of Information Act requests, some FOIA requests to the CDC before then, but then at that point I really had enough. I knew that there was malfeasance going on. They were covering up vaccine injuries to literally millions of children that were exposed to high levels of thimerosal, and that something needed to be done, and somehow this all needed to be exposed.
So what did you do at that point?
At that point, then, I submitted a flurry of Freedom of Information Act requests, and in order to avoid payment, as a private citizen, you can FOIA a small amount of information without cost. But once you get above, maybe 100-page limit or something like that, or once the searches are going to require more of the officials' times in this case at the CDC, then you start to pay for their time, you start to pay for printing charges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I needed to make sure that I had, and I actually did recruit a network of individuals that made sure that none of them had the same last name. And we basically, every month, you get one a month. And then after an individual submits one Freedom of Information Act request a month, then they start to do what's called aggregate them together. And so we had it set up that the first day of each month, and then all of my buddies that were submitting these FOIA requests with me, then we would fire off another one, and then we would fire off another one, and we would fire off another one. And then, by the time 2 years rolled around, then I had submitted over 100 FOIA requests to the CDC, and I had not only a network of individuals, including my father-in-law and my brother-in-law, and they have skin in the game. My brother-in-law has identical twins that also have autism, and were exposed to ROGAM through prenatally, and they were exposed to high levels of thimerosal prenatally through the ROGAM shots. And so that means that my father-in-law has 3 affected grandchildren, 3 thimerosal poison grandchildren, and so he had skin in the game as well. And then there were other individuals that had maybe more of a peripheral role, but these individuals, including probably first and foremost David Geyer, who is the son of Dr. Mark Geyer, who's worked in this area since, really since about 2001, 2002. All of these individuals were submitting FOIA requests. They were analyzing information. We wanted to make sure that we had many, many pairs of eyes on each document so we didn't miss anything. And what we found was a continued and very alarming pattern of scientific malfeasance, where if the CDC saw an adverse event, and the adverse event did correlate with a vaccine or a vaccine component, then they would deny it, they would dismiss it, they would work statistically until that particular association was no longer statistically significant, and that's what they would publish. So anything that would shed doubt on the safety of the vaccination program, the current vaccination schedule, the CDC would just simply not publish it. And they would not report it, obviously. So
why would they do that?
I'm an outsider. I've never worked for the Centers of Disease Control. I've never worked in the Department of Health and Human Services. I had a grant from the National Institutes of Health for a while. This was prior to me getting involved in this particular issue. I don't understand their culture well, but I do, from an outsider's viewpoint, believe that in their economy of thought, that in order to get people to do things that they think are the best to do, that it's okay to lie. That it's okay when they're communicating risk and they're communicating vaccination policy, then it's okay to lie as long as the general public good is being protected, okay? And the phrase that you hear often is that the benefits of vaccination outweigh the risks, okay? That's a ridiculous statement, okay? So if I have let's say I have a mole on my big toe, okay? I have a mole on my big toe, and therefore the doctor looks at it and says, oh, we want to catch that before maybe it goes precancerous, okay? And so he decides that he's going to cut off my foot because I have a mole that might go precancerous on my big toe, okay? So the risks, the benefits of cutting off my foot, that would outweigh the risks, okay? But, the benefits would be living versus perhaps getting cancer and dying, but that's not anywhere close to the best that we can do. That's nowhere close. And so what the CDC is saying, you know what, we don't have to make safer vaccines. As long as we're at the 50% benefit plus a feather, that's all we need. So if it's 50% plus a feather versus 50% minus a feather risks, then that's okay. And that's what they're purporting. And you hear that all the time. The benefits outweigh the risks. The benefits outweigh the risk. At this point in time, I would even doubt that statement. But they've been saying the same thing for such a long period of time. And they have been basically deaf to the outcry of people that want safer vaccines, and also beholden to, in some ways, to the pharmaceutical industry, although I don't really know exactly how that works. I've seen it go both ways. I've seen CDC dictate policy to pharma. I've seen pharma hold CDC hostage regarding policy. And so I don't know exactly how that works. But the culture is that they're looking at population dynamics. And if you have 100 people, if somehow you're benefiting 51 at the while sacrificing 49, then that's good. Can I mention one more thing before we go on? Okay, one of the things also that happened very early on when I started submitting FOIA requests. This was even before I had recruited anybody else to help me.
And when you say the FOIA, for this, maybe go ahead and say
Freedom of Information. Okay, so the Freedom of Information Act requests. When I started submitting these particular Freedom of Information Act requests, then odd things began to happen. I received a very, very uncomfortable phone call on my cell phone from an anonymous individual who identified themselves as a CDC official and who basically chastised me and essentially said that I needed to stop submitting FOIA requests. And this was a female voice, and she said, "I know what you're all about. I know what you're all about." She kept on repeating that particular phrase, and I asked her who she was, and she said, "Well, you're not telling me why you're submitting these FOIA requests, so I don't have to tell you who I am." And that was very, very unsettling. I happened to be at work at the time, and I knew that it was a 404 area code, and which is Atlanta, Georgia. And so I hung up the phone. It was extremely uncomfortable, and I did what anybody who was savvy on the internet did. I did a reverse phone lookup, and sure enough, it was a CDC employee, and she had called me regarding these particular FOIA requests to get me to stop. Soon after that, I filed a complaint with the CDC, and rather than getting a response, regarding this particular incident, I got a very threatening letter from an attorney from the CDC. I still have the letter, still have all the correspondences. I scanned it and I kept a copy of it. And this letter basically said that if I continued this course of action, she basically was concerned that I had made some phone calls to CDC researchers and asked some questions, then she would cut off all access to the CDC whatsoever. And so I knew, with this type of response, somebody's hiding something. Somebody does not want to get me at that particular information. It was very uncomfortable, but I did not want to be deterred. There was just too much at stake at that particular point in time in my own family's life. And, I'd met many, many other families that were in this situation that I just, at that point, I couldn't stop. So,
how would you encapsulate that, your impression of the data that's been suppressed?
Any data that have been suppressed are the data that would show a relationship between a vaccine adverse event and, in my case, the bulk of my Freedom of Information Act requests have dealt with thimerosal. I do not in any way, shape, or form think that thimerosal is the only issue. If you look at the autism epidemic, if you look at neurodevelopmental disorders in children and adults, if you look at any chronic illness, I think that you need to look at everything. And that, thimerosal may be the tip of the iceberg, but I see, based on information, I've looked at the things that the CDC has studied around this issue are really only thimerosal and the MMR. And the data that they hide are extremely compelling. They show a pattern that when children received thimerosal-containing vaccinations on time, and they received large doses of thimerosal, especially if they got that thimerosal early, then they were much more susceptible to be diagnosed with autism by the time they were 2, 3, 4 years old. And so these are the data that have been suppressed. Most recently, regarding the CDC published a study by a gentleman named Christopher Price. Christopher Price worked as a consultant to the CDC. He was not a CDC employee. The second author is a gentleman by the name of Frank DiStefano. He is a CDC employee, and he's the head of the Immunization Safety Office right now. In that particular paper, they reported that there was no significant risk between the maternal flu shot and autism, that there was no significant association. And they also published that there was no association between postnatal thimerosal exposure. Even looking at the schedule that had a lot more thimerosal exposure through the end of the 1990s, they said that they saw no effect. In fact, in some cases, thimerosal was protective. Okay, so first of all, the thing that they buried is that particular study they could not get published. That study went to the Journal of the American Medical Association, and the Journal of the American Medical Association submitted back to them a scathing review and flat out rejected that document for publication. It was not published. They turned around, then they submitted it again to the New England Journal of Medicine. The New England Journal of Medicine, at this point, much nicer, said that, look, we're not even going to consider this for peer review. So they did not submit, they did not turn it over to technical or scientific peer reviewers. What they did instead was just send a rejection letter back to the CDC. And then finally, it was published in 2010. It took 2 years from initially submitting it to the Journal of the American Medical Association. Before then, it appeared in print in the journal Pediatrics, and the information was just laughable. To say that thimerosal is neuroprotective is one of the most ludicrous things I've ever seen in my life. And they went on to say that there was no association between prenatal thimerosal exposure. Okay, that would be, in this day and age, that would be through the flu shot. But when you look at the background data, the data that they ignored, you actually saw that when they ran the model correctly, the statistical model that came up with the relative risks, that children that received this dosage of thimerosal prenatally, and this was only 16 micrograms of mercury. The full dose of the flu shot is 25 micrograms of mercury, and this would preferentially partition to the fetus. You've got to understand that. So when a pregnant woman receives a flu vaccination, the majority, regardless of body weight, the majority of the mercury goes to the fetus. Okay, and what the CDC buried was that these individuals, in the most reliable forms of the model, were subject to an 800% increase in the risk of getting an autism diagnosis. Okay, so these are the types of data that are being hidden. This is the type of information that never sees the light of day. They've done the same thing with ticks in boys. And consistently, because estrogen is essentially protective against thimerosal and mercury poisoning, then you see the effect much, much greater in boys. There is an effect in girls, but you see a much, much greater effect in boys. And the CDC has suppressed information regarding ticks in boys in 4 separate publications that they have published in scientific journals. Okay, so this information, it's never seen the light of day. Okay, I'm just now starting to get background information on the MMR, and just from a cursory viewpoint, we're seeing the same effect. That if the CDC sees an adverse event that's tied with a reaction, then they do worse than going into damage control mode. They essentially cherry pick the data. They pick the data that will support their mantra that vaccines are safe and effective, and any data that does not fit into that narrow window is summarily never reported. Okay, that's fraud. There's no simple way around it. That is fraud. Well, actually, there's no way, period, around it. If I've published over 50 scientific publications. I had my career in biotechnology for about 26 years now. I've been a researcher. I received my PhD in biochemical engineering in 1990. And if I had gone through that particular practice, if I had only shown data that would support my hypothesis at the expense of rejecting and not reporting data that would not support my hypothesis, I would be fired. Okay, the CDC is getting away with fraud. Okay, and they know it. It's not something that they're just stumbling upon. Oh, well, we forgot to report the data. Systematically, they look at information that does not support their credo that vaccines are always safe and effective, and they reject that information. They're harming children. They know they're harming children. It's called voluntary manslaughter, and it is a crime. Okay, the CDC is committing crimes, actual crimes. If you look at the U.S. judicial system and the U.S. federal code, they're committing crimes against children in the United States. It's because this information has to get out there in some way, shape, or form. I mean, we get nil traction with mainstream media, period. Don't even get me started on GMOs. I mean, I've genetically modified plants before. I have. That was part of my research. We didn't do it for food. I refused. I didn't think the data were there, and I didn't want to go there anyway. I mean, it was kind of a, for me, it was a low profit margin business. I didn't want to do it. I wanted to make replacement proteins. Back right after Y2K, I started genetically modifying plants, and we were able to produce the primary drug for hemophilia A. And we wanted to make it more. We wanted to drive the cost down of that particular product. Okay, that's what I want to do. But now I see what's going on with genetically modified plants. The fact that 80% of processed foods has genetically, probably mostly it's soybean, because they use soybean so much in processed food, and there's so much GM soybean in the country. It's and I don't know what to do. I mean, you can't. I have a little app on my phone now that, I can scan the barcode, and if it's certified GMO free, then I can get it. It's really hard to find that. It is. You got it like Trader Joe's maybe, or, so.
What
Yes.
kind of pattern you've witnessed?
Well, the pattern that I've witnessed in looking at the background information that I get from these Freedom of Information Act requests, the information that I get back, is that not only will the CDC suppress data from their studies that show any type of link between a vaccine component and some type of adverse event, but they will also suppress information from anybody else. They're trying very, very hard to make sure that any independent researchers that might publish an adverse event are censored, okay, so that their information never sees the light of day. Okay, back in 2004, Mark and David Geyer were the only independent individuals that had done epidemiology studies. I mean, sheer numbers, looking at populations that got the aerosol-containing vaccines versus populations that didn't, and then looking at different adverse events, namely autism and autism spectrum disorder, which is sort of a broader classification. Then the CDC worked very, very hard in maligning them. There's actually a publication that came out in the journal Pediatrics in which CDC employees knowingly slandered the Geyers. They knew that they had information. The Geyers had obtained manufactured specific information so they could calculate the dose of thimerosal. They had obtained that directly from a CDC employee. Okay, that was knowledge that individuals in the CDC knew. The CDC knew the Geyers were given that information. But yet, when you look at this publication, which was co-authored by the CDC, it was authored by Dr. Sarah Parker, who was from the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center. She was collaborating with CDC scientists at the time. And in that publication, they said that the Geyers made up their information, that the way that they calculated, there was no way essentially that they could calculate the amount of thimerosal that these individuals obtained. Okay, that was pure and simple slander. So what they've done, and we've seen it in other cases with other researchers, other individuals, anybody that's trying to get at information. I've seen it even in my own case, where because I have submitted so many Freedom of Information Act requests and I've actually published on the information that I've seen, that there are discussions on how they can actually suppress any type of information being given to anybody that would doubt or raise doubt with the veracity of the vaccination program. So it is an all-out effort to censor and suppress any information, regardless of where it comes from, internal to the CDC or independent researchers. It's just this huge network that's set up to try to control information, to lie, deceive, to slander, in order to get the population to do what they want the population to do. They want everybody to get every vaccination on the schedule, and they're going to do whatever it takes and whatever is in their power, regardless of whether it's legal, ethical, whatever, in order to achieve that particular objective. Okay? And lying is always on the table. I mean, I hate to be so blunt, but they lie. They lie repeatedly. That was a study done by Thomas Verstraeten. Okay, the Verstraeten study actually started in 1999. Okay, and the initial data were gathered in 1999. It came from one HMO. Okay, and I'm not exactly sure. There were 3 specific HMOs that were in play: Group Health Northwest, Northern California Kaiser, and then Harvard Pilgrim, which was not a part of the vaccine safety data link at the time. And so they had these 3 separate HMOs. And when Thomas Verstraeten first did his data analyses, then he saw that depending on the statistical model, the most reliable information that I saw, and I did not obtain this information until 2005, but the most reliable information that I saw showed that individuals that were getting high levels of thimerosal within the first month of life, so this would be the birth Hep B shot. You know, at the time, I think it was maybe recommended at 2 weeks to a month. Now, you know, for a while they were giving thimerosal containing Hep B shots right at birth, the day of birth or the day after birth. And they were showing a relative risk of 7.6. Okay. A relative risk for one means that the incidence of autism in populations that didn't versus that did get the thimerosal containing vaccines were the same. Okay. So 7.6. That means that there was a 660% increase in autism incidence in those babies, those infants that received that thimerosal-containing shot, okay, just in the first month. Okay, and Verstraeten was very concerned about that. They worked very, very hard to get that association to go away, okay? And then they, interestingly enough, at that point, Verstraeten no longer would comment, even within the CDC, about thimerosal exposure within the first month of life. Okay, they stopped looking at that because they saw what they didn't want to see, and so therefore they stopped looking. Okay, so they continued to dilute down the information. They looked at 2 HMOs. They did not do what would be logical in order to increase the size of the study population. Anybody that does statistics knows that you get more significant data and you can show more robust relationships if you have more individuals in your study. But they would never put together the 2 groups and consider them as one group, because as soon as they do that, then that would increase power to the results that they were obtaining, which we're saying is that the more thimerosal an individual received, the more likely they were to get an autism diagnosis in order to get other neurodevelopmental diagnoses at the time, including most notably tics, both motor tics, which are, you know, what you would consider, you know, spasms within muscles, or phonic tics, which would include stuttering or stammering, something like that. They were seeing very, very significant relationships. And when they did that, then they knew never put those data sets together, because they can limit the power of those associations if you keep them separately, keep small data sets. And then when all else failed, then they brought in an extremely small group from the Harvard Pilgrim HMO. Okay, and that particular HMO was at that point, I believe the HMO itself was in receivership. Their data were a mess, and they were not using the same diagnosis criteria for autism. Okay, and also at the time in Massachusetts, the autism rates in Massachusetts were the lowest in the country. Okay, so there's a reason why they picked Harvard Pilgrim. Okay, because if they didn't see an association in Harvard Pilgrim, then they could dismiss something and say, well, we didn't see a consistent association, and so therefore it must not exist. Okay, so there must not be a significant association with autism. Okay, and interestingly enough, they never, in the final Verstraeten study, it actually took 4 years from the initiation of the study before that study was published. It took 4 years. Interestingly enough, when that study hit the press, there was not one data point on autism. They basically said that there wasn't a statistically significant association, and they used very vague wording. So we don't know what the final data were. However, we know enough to know that the paper is statistically null and void because of a phenomenon called overmatching. Okay, the cases that they looked at that had autism and the controls that they looked at that didn't have autism, there was virtually no difference in the amount of thimerosal that they received. Okay, you can't do a study that way. There's no way. If somebody receives a dose of radiation and gets cancer and somebody else receives the same dose of radiation and doesn't get cancer, that study is inconclusive. Okay, and that is a bogus study, and it should have never been done. But that's what they did. They overmatched their data. Okay, and so cases and controls were getting the same, cases being the ones that have autism, controls being the one that don't have autism or a similar neurological diagnoses, and they have the same amount of thimerosal. And so what you saw was no association because that's what they wanted to find. And they manipulated their statistics. Statistics 101, it was overmatched. Okay, you can't do a study that way. And so therefore, you have to look at that information and say it's useless. It's rendered null and void. That's the study that your daughter participated in. You have to be careful. I've had, with that stupid phone call, oh, that was gross. And, I've had other parents say, oh, I think my phone's bugged. Okay, I've been on a call with Lynn Redwood, and she's like, oh, I'm hearing that clicking noise again. I wonder what that is. Yeah. And, so you don't know, you don't know what's going on. I mean, I get scared because what we leave, the residue that we leave in the vaccine safety data link, okay, when we're there, then the CDC can come in and they can basically armchair quarterback everything that we've done and then backdoor it. I mean, they go to peer reviewers. I mean, have this information. They go to peer reviewers of reputable journals. They go to the editors of reputable journals, and then they will slander researchers who have in the past shown vaccine adverse events. Okay, and that those events relate to, some type of vaccine or vaccine component. The CDC does that. That's how they try to suppress information that's produced by other individuals, independent individuals. I was fortunate enough to meet with Representative Issa in, May of 2012, twice. It was very interesting. The first time was a scheduled meeting. It was me and another parent of a child, actually two affected children. And I was able to sit down with Representative Issa at that time, his wife, and Representative Vern Buchanan. He's a congressman from Sarasota, Florida, and his wife. We were down in Florida, and I spent about an hour talking directly with Representative Issa about thimerosal. This was specifically about thimerosal. We did cover peripherally some of the malfeasance around the MMR, but I want to keep the message crisp, okay? And it turns out that as a part of my duties at the university where I work, I was on a National Science Foundation review panel about 2 weeks later back in D.C., And I called to schedule a meeting with one of Representative Ice's staff members, and it turns out that he wanted to meet with me again. He met with me a second time. Representative Buchanan was there again, and also Dan Burton, who's since retired from Congress. And they committed at that point that they would do a hearing, and that part of that hearing would be malfeasance in the CDC. Okay, and so the hearing evolved over a period of time. It actually became what was a federal response to the autism epidemic. Okay. It was very difficult. I was asked to testify at the very last minute at that hearing. Okay, and so as soon as I was flying to DC, I was not on the panel, but I was flying to DC anyhow because I wanted to be able to do some legwork prior to the hearing and make sure that information regarding the CDC was in the hands of members of this was the House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. So the committee members had that information. So I was just gonna, put on my running shoes and run around this information. As soon as the wheels hit the ground on the airplane, we hit the runway, I turned on my phone and I had a message that I was going to testify. Okay. And so I thought that's great. Timing, I wish I had a little bit more time. So I stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning working on my testimony. And, it was already time for 5 minutes, back and forth on the phone with my wife. How do I do this? She would listen. And so we were hammering out what's the most effective thing that I can say in 5 minutes. And then within the next, 12 hours, I was meeting with some staff members from the Oversight Committee, actually not, Congress, but actually the staff members. And they said that somebody from the minority side had objected to me testifying. So I was taken off the panel at the last minute. Okay. So that was pretty demoralizing. I did want to get the information out regarding the CDC malfeasance. But the nice thing about that particular hearing was that we had Representative Issa asking pointed questions to the CDC official who was there. That was Colleen Boyle. Colleen Boyle has been very, very thick in terms of the cover-up around thimerosal and autism specifically. I have many, many documents that show that she has suppressed information, and so I was very excited that she was on the panel. And so she was really grilled by Representative Issa, not so much by Representative Dan Burton from Indiana. He was more interested in what he actually had to say about mercury and didn't ask as many questions. But then Representative Posey and Representative Buchanan, both from Florida, were able to ask some questions that I was able to craft regarding the associations between autism and vaccines, autism and thimerosal, and why thimerosal, which is a neurotoxin, was still in the flu shot. Why was it in the flu shot? It's also in the tetanus toxoid vaccine. Okay, so it's still on the vaccine schedule. And Dr. Boyle's answers, as I was stated by a staffer from Oversight and Government Reform after the meeting, that individual staffer called her testimony impeachable. And so that was very, very telling. They gave her another opportunity to answer about 20 written questions, 16 of which I had written and given to the folks at Oversight and Government Reform. And it took about 4.5 months to get answers back from her. And it was even worse. Okay, the amount of sidestepping, the amount of out and out lying, data suppression. We haven't mentioned Dr. Paul Thorson, who was integral in the cover-up of the relationship between thimerosal-containing vaccines and autism. He was a Danish researcher that has been indicted in Atlanta federal court for embezzlement of $1 million of CDC funding, literally this is an individual who walked up to the CDC credit union, and because he had access to these funds, withdrew the money directly, bought a house in Atlanta, bought a car, bought a Harley Davidson, took about $1 million, based on the federal indictment, 22 counts in total. What CDC claimed in the answers that they gave to the Oversight and Government Reform Committee was that Dr. Thorson never directly received funds from the CDC. And that's a pure lie. That's a pure lie. There's no way around it. He received $11 million. He got $11 million worth of research funds. He set up his own institution in Denmark specifically to look at autism, okay, as a cover, okay. Instead of they did not look at vaccines, but they looked at everything else under the sun that they could blame for the autism epidemic. Old dads, fat moms, psychotic parents, whatever. There were many, many studies that came out of that institute basically as cover to take the heat off of the vaccination program, to basically ascribe autism to anything that wasn't vaccines. Okay, Paul Thorson embezzled $1 million of funds. Or $1 million of funds. He received $11 million for his research directly from the CDC. And then the CDC turned around and lied and said he never received any money from the CDC, period. Okay, and the lies were, it was very, very blatant. I could spend hours talking about the ways that the CDC basically misrepresented their activities around the autism epidemic, around vaccine safety within this one document. Okay, it was indeed incredible. Okay. Thorson was a researcher in Denmark. Okay, I think he's maybe a little older than me. I think he's in his mid-50s. And he was actually a visiting scientist at the CDC in the late 90s. Okay, he went back to Denmark. Okay, when he's actually, what you would call an autism specialist. Okay, his specialty, he's an MD, okay, he's a medical doctor, he's not a PhD, but his specialty was in neurodevelopmental disorders in children, okay. He spent 2 years, as far as I can tell, it's very, very difficult to get any information out of the CDC on Paul Thorson, obviously. But as far as I can tell, he was a CDC visiting scientist for 2 years. He went back to Denmark, and then once he was back in Denmark, he worked directly with CDC scientists, both in, they had 2 centers that were involved with him, the National Immunization Program, which is one center of the CDC, and the National Center for Birth Defects and Developmental Disabilities. He worked with scientists in both centers to basically come up with, essentially manufacture autism incidence data from Denmark that showed there wasn't a relationship between thimerosal-containing vaccines and autism. And he published a study. He was a co-author that he coordinated the study with the CDC. CDC did not have any scientists that published it, but they did recommend it for expedited review in the journal Pediatrics. Okay, and he got this study published in 2003. And this study was supposed to be one of the end-all studies that said the debate's over. There's no relationship. If you look at the background information, I was able to reanalyze the information. I've actually published a letter to the editor in the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons. I tried to get the letter to the editor published in the journal Pediatrics. They wouldn't touch it. Okay. In fact, when I did submit that letter to the editor of the journal Pediatrics, they allowed the Danish authors, including Paul Thorson, a chance to respond, and the Danish authors never responded to my critique. But when I went back and I reanalyzed the data, I showed that essentially that after they removed thimerosal in Denmark, okay, thimerosal was removed from vaccines in 1992, then the autism diagnosis rates plummeted. They probably went down by about 75%. However, the Danish study, they were able, the study that was co-authored by Paul Thorson, they were able to manipulate that information. And when you read that study, it shows that autism diagnoses increased after thimerosal was removed from vaccinations. So it was a big manufacturer. It was a big hungry lie. Okay. And for that particular hungry lie, then Thorson was rewarded handsomely. Okay. To me, it was a classic case of quid pro quo, that he was able to publish that study. And after he published that study, he received the lion's share. He might have gotten a little money before, but he received the lion's share of the $11 million that were invested in his research center at Aarhus University in Denmark after he was able to get that study published. Okay, and it's abysmal. It's one of the worst studies I've ever seen from a statistical perspective. And again, as is the case with most studies where the CDC is trying to hide this information, that particular study was rejected by the journal The Lancet. And then they turned around and they submitted a different manuscript, same data, to the Journal of the American Medical Association. It was rejected there. And then finally, after they had actually cherry-picked and took out data points on autism incidents, then it was accepted by the Journal of Pediatrics in 2003. Okay, so these studies are abysmal. They get bounced around between journals until they can find a journal that will publish these fabrications, and then they're published. Okay, and the American public and the pediatricians, they're not reading the studies, they're reading the press releases. And whenever a study comes out, doesn't matter what journal it comes from, the CDC will issue press releases. They will get FaceTime all over the mainstream media. Vaccines don't cause autism. Thimerosal doesn't cause autism. The vaccination schedule is great. And it doesn't matter how many times that particular publication was rejected, because that information never makes the light of day. And if I had not submitted those Freedom of Information Act requests, nobody outside of the CDC would have known that these papers were rejected. They're just absolutely laughable. You look at the components of vaccines, and there are animal-derived cells, there are human cells, and there are now insect cells in the flu vaccine, the new formulation that's going to come out, I believe, in the next season. It's been FDA approved. Then these carry different viruses. Okay, so viruses that are indigenous to humans, animals, and now insects are basically being injected directly into your system. Okay, they're injected into your muscle tissue. And the issue here is that this DNA is going to integrate into your genome. It doesn't, it's not a given, but there is a strong frequency, a high enough frequency of this, foreign viral DNA being able to integrate directly into our chromosomes. Okay, when it integrates into our chromosomes and our chromosomes divide, then, whenever a cell divides, then the chromosomes go with it. Okay, so you get a new set of what we call daughter chromosomes. That foreign DNA, that viral DNA, goes along with it. Okay, and when that viral DNA goes along with it, then the body doesn't know what to do with it. Okay, what happens then is the body has proofreading mechanisms, and it will proofread and see that this is not necessarily natural human DNA. It's not something that necessarily belongs in human chromosomes. Okay, so that DNA will be methylated. Okay, and when it's methylated, that means that it is knocked out of function. Okay, it's still there, but it's non-functioning DNA. But that proofreading mechanism is, not 100% effective. Okay, it can break down. And as a result, then all of a sudden we've got viral DNA contaminating our genome. Okay, if we carry viral DNA, then there's a strong possibility that we'll pass it on to our children. Our children can carry then the same viral DNA, and so we're permanently altering the species, okay, when we have this exposure. And it's not that human beings were never exposed to this type of viruses before. We carry vestiges, we carry ancient viruses within our DNA right now. But now we have this huge preponderance. We have this bombardment with, a viral DNA that the body has not seen before. And so there's much a greater chance of it, number one, integrating into the chromosomes, and then number two, the body not being able to proofread it. And so all of a sudden, these genes are on, they're what we call expressed, okay? And so they're producing proteins that can lead to different maladies, okay? The biggest one is a virus that's a monkey virus. It's called SV40, okay? SV40 was in vaccines that were administered early on, I think 50s and 60s. And now the SV40 virus is a known oncogene. It causes cancer, okay? When you have SV40 virus DNA within your genome, then you have a higher risk of having certain types of cancers. Okay, now the other DNA, the other viral DNA, we don't know what it does, okay? And so it's different than thimerosal, it's different than the MMR, it's different than the DTaP, where it's established both from a biological mechanistic standpoint and a epidemiology standpoint that there's some effect, okay? We know what the effects are. We know thimerosal causes autism. CDC knows that thimerosal causes autism. Why else are they working so hard to keep all this information out of the public eye? Okay, they know that it causes autism. They know MMR causes autism. But we don't know what these particular elements will do, okay? And so it's not good. If you don't know what's going to do for your body, why do you put it into your body in the first place? Okay, we don't know what the ramifications are. And that the thing that's insidious about, these particular contaminants, these DNA contaminants, is they're basically changing the genetic record of the human species. Okay, so we are essentially becoming genetically modified by physicians, by pediatricians, by scientists and researchers that are recommending that we stick these things into our bodies. And then humankind as we know it has changed. The genetic record, the genetic code for human beings is now different, okay? And we do not know the ramifications of doing that. Like I said before, we have the human DNA, human genome has been permanently altered in the past, okay, but not by vaccination and not anywhere to the extent of the exposure to different human, different animal, different insect viruses that we're seeing today. Okay, so we, yes, it has happened in the past. Yes, we know DNA sticks together. It likes to stick together. That's called ligation. Okay, when DNA ligates, that means that it comes together. That's the way it's designed. It sticks together. One end of DNA, like another end of, like two ropes together, if somehow you could glue them together with really wonderful super glue, that's how DNA comes together. So if you stick a fragment of DNA, like a virus, into a cell, then it can and it will incorporate into our chromosomes. Okay, now we're doing that. We're exposing the body to a much greater amount of these DNA fragments, and we really don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows what, how that is going to impact humanity, and it will impact humanity. And once that gets into chromosomes, it doesn't leave. Okay, it passes on for generations. We just cannot, we're monkeying with things, that these substandard scientists, they're MDs. MDs really are not trained in research. I mean, if you go to medical school, they're not trained to be a researcher. They're not. They don't know what they're doing. And you find nary a PhD scientist at the CDC. They're few and far between. So. Sure, we don't know what happens. I mean, in terms of where I prioritize my effort, regarding the mess that has been made, not necessarily preventing mess. I mean, the best prevention is just tell people don't get vaccinated. Don't get vaccinated. I wish I could say differently. I mean, I did believe differently until, even 2 years ago, I thought, well, perhaps some vaccines are doing some good. I just don't believe that anymore. But in terms of cleaning up the mess, the people that have already been damaged, my priority right now is to where we know what we know that there's a solid effect, and we know what the damage is. And so I have been focusing on thimerosal. I have been focusing on the MMR and those aspects of the schedule. Where we don't know, I mean, we just need to sink a lot of money into understanding, what's the mechanism, okay? Mechanistically, what happens to the cell when we insert foreign DNA into it. I do know that it is in single dose vials, so you would never get the full wallop of thimerosal like what you get in a flu shot. Okay, so it just, it doesn't, by trace, when it's reported as trace, that's usually means 0.3 micrograms per shot or less, okay, which I just don't find any amount of mercury acceptable, period. So, what you call trace amounts, I think that, mercury is a cumulative neurotoxin, okay? It does accumulate into your system. And despite what, pharma funded studies would say, that, oh, well, it clears and it, leaves the bloodstream, it must be going out of the feces. Nobody's ever really done a mass balance on it. By mass balance, it's like 25 micrograms goes in. Where did it go? Okay. They really, can't account for all of it leaving the body. It accumulates into the system. As far as the MMR is concerned, the epidemiological data are clear. Okay, a MMR that's given on time will lead to more autism. Okay, an MMR that's delayed leads to less autism. The best MMR, in my opinion, is one that's not given. Okay, there are multiple issues regarding the MMR and autism, and there's other issues regarding the MMR and other chronic disorders. Okay, so I don't see that should be given. I think one of the issues that does come up is, the results of Andy Wakefield. He's a good friend of mine. He's just another person bent over backwards for my son. He's a phone call away in terms of anything that's going on, with gut issues. It's not just me. It's really any parent. I mean, he's going to pick up the phone. If he can help a parent, he will. And, he has basically no skin in the game himself. He doesn't have an affected child. And he's just one of the kindest people. He doesn't have, the General Medical Council in the UK has slammed and slandered him and called him a charlatan. He just does not have any of the characteristics that you would see of somebody that was peddling bad science. He's a meticulous scientist. He's a very good scientist. What you do see is that these particular children have an immune response that they cannot handle the multiple antigens within the MMR, okay? And so when you look at the architecture of the immune cells that line the gut, they're overwhelmed with, what is supposed to elicit the immune response. We call that antigen, okay? It's not necessarily the whole virus or whatever. In fact, I don't know the architecture of MMR well enough to know, exactly what's in it, but it gets loaded with antigen. The cells cannot give an appropriate immune response, okay? They are, for some reason, the immune system is impaired, okay? There could be a number of different types of impairment with the immune system. It might be the initial immune response that is sluggish, and so those cells and so those viruses, then, I take that back. There is live virus in the MMR. I knew that. Okay. But there are issues in terms of then those cells not being able to respond, okay, in the gut. And when they're not able to respond in the gut, then the immunity lasts for a longer period of time. Okay, so you have a longer period of time that immune molecules are being circulated, not only within the intestinal endothelium, okay, which is the inner layer of the intestines, and as well as the epithelium, which is the outer layer of the intestines. And also these immune cells are then circulating in the bloodstream and all the way throughout the body. Okay, then what can and will happen is that the the immune system is slow to respond, and it's a more long-acting response. And then in the case of individuals, they are missing part of the mechanism that cleans up the mess and modulates the immune system after the vaccine is administered. I mean, if vaccines were if you look at the design of vaccines, the way that they're supposed to operate is they have an attenuated immune response, just enough immune response in order to create antibodies to measles, mumps, rubella. What's happening instead in these children that have impaired immunity, okay, they are somehow immunocompromised, is that immune response is sluggish to turn on, and then it's very, very difficult to turn off. Okay, we were not meant to have an active, long-term immune response to any vaccination. That's what they're seeing in these children. A lot of these children have a defect in a part of the immune system called the complement cascade. There's studies that have come out of Utah State University. Okay, I think that's the one in Logan. Okay, so studies that have come out in Utah State University that show a higher frequency of a particular defect in one of these complement proteins. And you look at it, and those are the proteins that are specific for cleaning up the immune system, getting rid of things that would cause the immune system to be, or immune reaction to be long-acting. And some of these kids literally are missing the gene. They don't have the gene for that particular protein that is going to help them clean it up. Okay, so instead of having an immune response that's short, okay, gets the job done, now you're immune to those 3 diseases, it has an immune response that's basically on slow simmer for a long period of time. Okay, and you go and you look at the architecture within these kids. The immune cells are stuffed with antigen, stuffed with the viruses, okay, and they're not able to fight the infection, but they're in sort of this long-term immune suspended animation. And so that immune response, when you do that to the body, when the body has a long-term immune response that it's not supposed to have, then the immune cells, instead of recognizing, oh, well, that's measles virus, or that's mumps virus, or that's rubella virus, then the immune cells start to turn on human tissues themselves, okay? The mechanism that discerns between self and non-self then becomes fuzzy, okay? It no longer, the longer that immune response occurs, then all of a sudden you start to get autoimmunity being built up. Okay. And kids that have had reactions to MMR that lead to neurological difficulties, they get all of a sudden they become autoimmune to specific brain proteins. Myelin basic protein is a nervous system protein. You'll find it in nerve tissue. Okay, and these kids, they become immune to their own myelin basic protein. So now their immune system, and instead of attacking the nasties, okay, and instead of attacking viral infections and bacterial infections, now it's attacking the own body. It's attacking its own nervous system. And guess what you see? You see a lack of conductivity within the nerve tissues within affected children. Neurologically impaired children, children with autism, they have neurologically disconnected immune systems. Okay, so when you see an individual that has autism and they put their arms out in space, they have no idea what's the relationship of their hands to the rest of their body, okay? Because the conductivity, the nerve cells that are running throughout their body they're sluggish, they're having an immune reaction against those nerve cells, and so the conductivity is just disrupted. Okay, and so they don't exactly know where their hands are in space. So the way they identify where their hands are in space, they flap them. Okay, if I can get a lot of sensory stimulus, okay, then I can, and I've got impaired nerve connections that are going to communicate with my brain, then the way that I get some type of communication is to be able to flap my hands. Okay, so when I see my son flap his hands, which he does, or when he does something that basically is a repetitive action that is going to cause muscle stimulus, I never get in the way of that. He is just trying to find out where his body is in space. Okay, and all those things are due to an autoimmune reaction. It attacks the nerve cells. Okay, myelin basic protein is just one of many proteins that the body will raise an autoimmunity to. And then all of a sudden you have neural disconnectivity. The neurons are not, they're not connected. Okay, they're not firing in sync. They've got to be synchronized. And so these kids don't really know where their bodies are oriented in space. So we have to look at the First Amendment issues. It is the right of people to be able to disseminate their opinions on anything, okay? Regardless of whether their opinions are right or wrong, convenient, inconvenient, whatever, okay? And so, our First Amendment rights say that, we should be able to post different things on, the World Wide Web that are, basically encapsulate what we believe, okay? So, I don't really like internet censorship, okay? I believe that, with my own son, that, being able to censor and being able to look at the information that he's going to have available for him that is appropriate for his age group, that's my responsibility. I will do it, okay? And so but limiting the information that consumers have available to them regarding vaccination choice is, you're doing the public an extreme disservice. I mean, you're censoring information, and then they are the ones that are basically deciding what is the good science and what is the bad science. And guess what? Any science that the Gates Foundation that promotes vaccination is going to be good science. And any science that the Gates Foundation sees that is going to shed any doubt regarding the safety of vaccinations is going to be bad science. Okay, we've seen this over and over and over again. You look at people that frequently blog or write for Discover Magazine or for Slate or for, Rolling Stone or whatever, okay? If they are in the mainstream media and if they are a science editor and they have been in the mainstream media for a while, then they will either not cover this particular issue or they will make the decision for the general public that vaccinations are good. And so therefore any science that will shed doubt on the safety of vaccines is automatically bad. Okay, I've talked to individuals that are these science writers. I had a very, very actually disturbing conversation with an individual recently. I can't remember who he blogged for, but it was a major like Discover or something like that. But this particular individual was sharing with me how scientific journalists vet science, and one of the things that he said that he did to vet science was that he saw what was the established scientific community saying. Okay, that's dangerous. That's extremely dangerous. Okay, and the thing that was actually missing from that conversation was that individual actually going out and looking at the scientific research and making a decision for themselves. Okay, that was missing. It was basically, okay, the establishment is going to tell me what to believe. And when we have people trolling the internet, I mean, they're called trolls for a reason, okay? And if anybody's been on the internet for any period of time, you know what a troll is, okay? And they're trolling the internet, and they're basically looking for information and taking out information or smearing information or maligning information that could promote the safety of children. They're doing a huge disservice, okay? And that, looking at what the Gates Foundation has done and the amount of neurodevelopmental disabilities that they have literally exported, to India and to Africa and to other nations where they're looking at vaccination as, the cure-all for the ills of the world, then, they're basically, they're what they're exporting is, number one, is a black mark for the United States. Okay, it's a foreign policy nightmare, because we're getting villages, literally, where thousands of children are getting neurodevelopmental disorders. I mean, there's individuals. There's a case, of polio on the rise. I mean, the number, I don't want to exactly quote the number, but it was a huge, because I don't remember it directly, but there were a huge number of individuals that received polio vaccination and ended up being paralytic. Okay. And that's what we're exporting. That's what the Gates Foundation is doing. And somehow, with the same mantra that the benefits somehow outweigh the risks, okay? So 51 people are being benefited and 49 people are being irreversibly maimed, okay? And somehow that's a good thing. Then that is what they're promoting, okay? And when you take a step back at that and you see the populations of poor countries and individuals that are malnourished, okay, that are fighting disease, okay, they're the least likely people, and they're the people that should never be getting vaccinated, because if they're malnourished and if they're fighting diseases at a very high rate, okay, that perhaps they're getting vaccinated for or not, they're immunocompromised. Okay, so I would entreat, if somebody from the Gates Foundation sat down with me, I would say, here's an idea. Let's give them clean water and good food. Okay, you don't take somebody that's starving to death and pop them with a vaccination and say all better. There's a biblical quote. I don't know exactly where it is. It's somewhere in the New Testament, and it talks about the futility of looking at somebody who is starving to death and pronouncing over them, go on your way, be well fed, be glad, without doing anything to them. That's what they're doing. Okay, these people need clean water. They need good food. They do not need vaccinations. They're the least likely population or the population that probably is going to be the least equipped to fight against vaccine adverse reactions, but somehow the Gates Foundation has fixated that they're saving the world. Okay, actually they're harming and they're maiming the world. Okay, so the more that they troll around trying to squash misinformation, and one of the nice things about it, one of the things I enjoy is, when I find somebody, that's a troll, that's found something that is attributed to me on the internet, and they start blogging negatively about it, then they're just spreading the word. Okay, more people are finding out about the research that I'm doing. That's great. Okay, so if they get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, they blog until 10 o'clock at night. In some ways that's free publicity, and they might not say nice things about me. There are ad hominem attacks for many, many people, in the community that's concerned about vaccine safety, specifically related to autism. And, that's fine that they say not nice things. I don't, I've had instances where people have said, oh, well, you need to get on their blogs and, and be able to refute what they're saying. And you have to look at it and say, well, what am I supposed to say to refute that? Oh, he's wrong. I'm not a jerk. I'm not a big hairy idiot. It's, there's really no place for ad hominem attack. And so, why flatter them by, trying to counter some ad hominem attack? Okay, stick to the science. Okay, the science shows that vaccinations are not safe. They're not effective. Okay, CDC knows about it. They continue. They believe this flawed mantra that somehow the rewards outweigh the risk, and it's just wrong. Yeah, there's metallothionein. That's a good one. Okay. There's a lot of proteins that will detoxify different toxins. It doesn't have to be thimerosal, okay? Different toxins in the body, and we're bombarded with toxins as it is. Actually gets worse for the body when they're injected, okay? There's a real problem. If you look at your skin as a barrier, it's awesome, okay? It wasn't really designed to be breached, okay? So you need to be very careful when that particular barrier is breached, okay? The way that, things get into the body naturally is through the mucous membranes, lining, your nasal region, the mucous membranes that, comprise your gastrointestinal system. Those are natural ways for your body to absorb things from the environment. Okay, it's not, it's fairly unnatural to have a needle stick. Okay, a lot of people don't like, in the if you talk to different integrative physicians, okay, and naturopaths, they don't like needle sticks, and that's, and it makes sense to me. Okay, that does make sense to me. The body has many proteins. Usually they're sulfur-containing proteins, like metallothionein, like apolipoprotein E. Okay, that has different variants that allow it to detoxify specific chemicals. Okay, when you have a particular defect in producing that protein or producing the amino acids that are going to produce that protein, then life becomes more difficult for you. Okay, and the thing that has been frustrating to me is that science is there. Okay, if there's going to be a vaccination program in the United States, why don't we use genetic tests to be able to identify those individuals that are going to have vaccine adverse reactions? Okay, so if that is going to be a requirement, okay, if you are going to have to fight a civil rights battle not to be vaccinated, okay, which a lot of people are having to do. At a minimum, you have to state a philosophical exemption or a religious exemption. Okay, so somehow you have to fight to become exempt to vaccinations. If that impediment is there, then why aren't we assuring the safety of these individuals with technology that's been available for over 10 years? Okay, so we can do gene sequencing. It happens all the time. I have, genetic sequences that have been done for me and for very little cost. Okay, it happened to be a part of a research study, and for my wife and also for my son. Okay, and what we found was that we really shouldn't have been vaccinated. Okay, and we should have surely never gotten thimerosal-containing vaccines, period. Okay, our bodies are just not set up to detoxify mercury and other types of toxins, specifically heavy metals. You have to remember that many, if not most of the vaccines that are currently on the schedule still have aluminum. Aluminum is not a native protein to the body. The body doesn't know what to do with aluminum. The body doesn't use aluminum. We don't have an aluminum requirement. Okay, so that is a toxin. And that's in as adjuvants, as things that are supposedly going to promote an immune response. That's in vaccines. Okay, so it would be very, very simple to develop a genetic test to screen out those individuals that should not be vaccinated or are most susceptible for a vaccine adverse reaction. There's a scientist, and I'm going to mention him by name. Okay, sometimes I don't like to do that, but his name is Dr. Gregory Poland. Okay, Dr. Gregory Poland works currently at the Mayo Clinic. Dr. Gregory Poland is also the editor of the journal Vaccine. Okay, he's also very, very vocal about people like me, who he would say is anti-vaccine wacko. Okay, back in 2008 and 2009, Dr. Poland started to do research on what he called the adversosome. Okay, now anything that ends with zome That's just a trendy biotech word that says, oh, okay, we're looking at the entire either genetic makeup of an individual or protein makeup of an individual or RNA makeup of an individual. So they put Zome on it. Okay, so when you look at the genetics that will define and say these individuals, by studying them, by studying these specific individuals through epidemiology or whatever, these are the individuals that are more susceptible, and they have this particular genetic makeup. Then Dr. Pollan back in 2008 and 2009 was suggesting that you could identify these individuals by the fact that these particular genetic defects or these particular genetic mutations were showing more vaccine injury or vaccine adverse events. Okay. Interestingly enough, he published in 2008 and he published in 2009. It looked like he would continue to publish, and then all of a sudden he fell silent. Okay. I believe that Dr. Pollan stumbled upon something. He looked under a rock that, according to the establishment, according to large pharmaceutical industries, according to the DHHS, according specifically to the CDC, that was a rock that should have never been looked under. Okay, and then interestingly enough, that's when he became very vocal against anti-vaccine wackos, and he stopped publishing regarding vaccine adverse events and the fact that you could use genetics to predict which individuals would have vaccine adverse events. It's very, very simple. The technology's there. The technology is now old. If you look at how quickly technology is being developed worldwide, a 10-year technology, something that we could have done, literally when my son was born in 1998, that's an old technology, okay? And it would be a cheap technology, okay? But as soon as you stop vaccinating individuals, pharmaceutical manufacturing firms lose money, okay? Other individuals are less likely to be vaccinated because, from a PR perspective, they never, ever, ever, ever want to talk about vaccine adverse events. They're not going to talk about vaccination and adverse events in the same sentence or in the same paragraph or in the same millennium, excuse me. And so it's just not going to happen. So, it's very... that whole, we have ways that we can predict which individuals are more susceptible to breast cancer, okay? Which individuals are going to be more susceptible to diabetes and obesity. And we also have ways to predict which individuals are going to be more susceptible to adverse reactions in vaccines, okay? But that research is never going to see the light of day. That's the research that nobody within the establishment is ever going to do. And so you'll never see a funding agency like the National Institutes of Health or the CDC, which actually funds independent research as well. They're never going to fund that study. It's when you talk about Julie Gerberding, okay, former director of, the CDC, now the head of the vaccine division of Merck. Okay, so she's had a very, very lucrative position. This is the example of the revolving door between the CDC and the vaccination industry. Okay, happens all the time. I can think of examples of people that go back and forth. Not only Julie Gerberding, Thomas Verstraeten left CDC in 2001, went to GlaxoSmithKline. Bill Thompson, who's now a CDC employee, a scientist that looks at vaccine safety. I think he looks away from vaccine safety, but he's formerly from Merck. You look at Frank DiStefano, who is currently the head of the Immunization Safety Office. He's been back and forth. He's been with an industry consultant called RTI from Atlanta. He's been at Emory University. And so he's been on the outside working in private industry for promotion of vaccines, and he's been on the inside supposedly looking at vaccine safety, okay? And this should not be, this is a huge, huge conflict of interest. And the fact, I have example after example where Thomas Verstraeten, once he left GlaxoSmithKline, was recruiting individuals directly from within the CDC to come and become vaccine safety experts and epidemiologists at GlaxoSmithKline. Okay, so there was tremendous amount of pressure for those individuals if they want any type of career longevity. Okay, they were well paid at the CDC. They would be better paid within the industry. Okay, and so therefore, why would you sacrifice your career and your family to tell the truth? Okay, and so we're looking at a different economy here. These are people who have shown that they're in terms of vaccine safety, they're moral relativists. Okay, they're not going to tell the truth. Okay, and they believe it's okay not to tell the truth in order to get the majority of the people in the United States to do what they want to do. Okay, and now you add on top of that a very lucrative position where you can retire and get a very lucrative retirement at a vaccine manufacturing firm. Okay, and the list goes on and on and on. Okay, there's an individual named Robert Davis. Okay, he didn't go work with vaccine manufacturers. He ended up working for a health maintenance organization. But the same thing, okay? If that individual had looked at and honestly reported regarding issues with vaccine safety and vaccine adverse events, then he would be much, much less likely to be able to get that type of position, and he would be much, much less marketable. Okay? And so the pressure is there. Julie Gerberding, individually, she's she's done an extreme amount of damage to United States public health, period. Okay, she has damaged the United States public health system by lying. Okay, I've gotten letters directly from her. She was very, very concerned because when I was up in the state of Washington, I lived in the state of Washington. I had Senator Patty Murray working on my behalf. She was extremely gracious, helped me out a lot. I had Representative Doc Hastings over from the Tri-Cities area in eastern Washington. He was writing letters on my behalf. And so she became very, very concerned. And obviously, internally, I've seen from FOIAing information and getting information otherwise from the CDC, they were very, very concerned that I was getting congressmen and senators involved. So there were specific letters directly from Julie Gerberding where I can go through and I can delineate lie after lie after lie after lie. I also have background information that was released from Dave Weldon's office. Dave Weldon was a congressional representative from Florida who is very, very concerned. Not only is he a medical doctor and he's now practicing, but he was very, very concerned regarding vaccine safety, specifically around thimerosal-containing vaccines. Julie Gerberding had specific conversations with him, and I was able to obtain all of the notes from those conversations. And again, I can look at lie after lie after lie after lie. Okay. In 2004, the Centers for Disease Control paid the Institute of Medicine to shut down debate and shut down research regarding thimerosal-containing vaccines in autism and the MMR in autism. Okay, that is a clear fact. For that one meeting, CDC paid the Institute of Medicine $750,000 to shut down that debate. Okay, I have the invoices I can show you. Now, when Dr. Weldon, okay, the congressman from Florida, talked with Julie Gerberding on the phone, on the conference call, she promised to him that this was not the final word, and it was not intended to be the final word concerning vaccines and autism. Okay, that was what she said about that 2004 Iowa meeting that CDC clearly designed to be able to shut down the debate and never talk again and never fund research again about vaccines and autism. Okay, she lied directly to a congressman. Okay, he's no longer in Congress. Okay, that doesn't really change the fact that I have the notes and she lied directly. Okay, she deceived him into believing that there were going to be more reviews regarding thimerosal and autism and the MMR and autism, but effectively what she did was, and she was directly involved in it, was she designed and helped to implement that particular meeting to shut down the debate and to be the final word. You look at this, I believe it was Marie McCormick, Dr. Marie McCormick. She was the chairperson for the Institute of Medicine Immunization Safety Review meetings. These were, this was a committee. It was hand-selected by the Institute of Medicine. It was vetted by the CDC. They were designed basically to absolve vaccinations regarding the autism epidemic. Okay, Dr. McCormick is a professor at Harvard University. She's a professor of public health. She's an MD. And when I was able to obtain a closed-door transcript from there were actually 9 meetings of this particular committee in terms of vaccination safety review. And I was able to obtain 2 of the closed-door transcripts of the meetings. This was, they would have a public meeting. Scientists would present information regarding vaccine safety, some questioning vaccine safety and some promoting and actually saying that these were safe vaccines. And then the committee would go into a closed-door meeting. Okay. And just like anything, any type of, court proceeding or whatever, there was somebody recording minutes. Okay, I don't know if it was tape recorded or if they had somebody that had one of those little machine things or whatever. So I was able to look at these closed-door transcripts, and what she said was, she said she had a dragon by the tail. Okay, and so and she was referring to the mess that the CDC had created. Okay, and this was back when she said this was back in 2001. And she also admitted at one point in these closed-door transcripts that in order to get around this issue, she was dancing. Somebody else in the committee, one of the other committee members, actually said, okay, well, you're dancing around this issue. And she said, not only am I dancing, I'm tap dancing. Okay? She knew it. Okay, so I have no clue, how does the CDC or anybody clean up the biggest iatrogenic catastrophe in history? Okay, that's, I don't think I'm exaggerating. I mean, when we look at the magnitude of this, when we look at the different chronic diseases that mercury exposure causes, okay, and I believe that thimerosal, historically, we're going to find out that thimerosal is worse than elemental mercury, mercury salts, methyl mercury, which is what you get from fish, that it's going to be worse than, these are the different types. There's 4 basic types of mercury contamination. Okay, we're going to find out that thimerosal was absolutely the worst in terms of chronic disease. Okay, that is what history is going to bear on, the autism epidemic, the huge increase in neurodevelopmental and behavioral disorders in children, and specifically boys, and the increase in different types of chronic diseases that we're seeing within children. Okay, I don't think we have it with autism. We have not scratched the surface. Okay, when we look at other conditions, chronic diseases, neurological and otherwise, then we're going to see that poisoning children with mercury is not, this is not something you can't say, as they say, oh, it's just a very, very small amount of mercury and it keeps the vaccines fresh. I mean, I heard somebody say that on a radio interview that was a CDC representative, keeps vaccines fresh. All of a sudden it sounded like Wonder Bread, okay? Kills children in 9 different ways. No, but anyhow, this is. I had to laugh. I was listening to the interview, and David Kirby called me. We're both listening at the same time. He called me. He's like, "Did you hear what you just said?" And I said, "Yeah, it keeps vaccines fresh." And that's a happy thought. But I have the fact that we have so many children that are actually vaccine injured. Okay, if we were to compensate those individuals, I mean, if we look at the different decisions that have come out where the government has admitted that vaccines caused autism, if you look at the Hannah Poling case, the payout, I believe, is around $29 million. Okay, and if we look at all the children that are really affected by thimerosal, by the MMR, by the other things that we haven't even, we don't know the scientific or the biological mechanisms that are there that we're polluting our bodies with, we're going to bankrupt the government. There's not enough money. There's not enough money. The vaccine injury fund right now that they use to disperse through the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program has about $2 billion. Okay, when you divide that by 9 million, that's not that many children. Okay, so we have, we indeed, we have a huge mess on our hands. Okay, some people are creating cottage industry out of it. It's very, very upsetting. You look at the organization Autism Speaks. They're trying to promote entrepreneurial efforts so people can sell stuff to families that are affected by autism. I think that's beyond insidious. That's beyond insidious. Talk about an abuse. Okay, I when I first heard about that, and that they were working, for pharmaceuticals, so we can give our kids more drugs that their body really can't detoxify in the first place. So we're going to give them more pharmaceuticals. We're going to give them Adderall, and we're going to give them Risperdal, and we're going to give them Ritalin. Okay, all these things. You go to a mainstream physician. That's what they want to give to your child with autism, or they want to put them on Klonopin. Okay, a tranquilizer. Okay, so at least they can be, tranquil and autistic. Well, they're in tremendous gut pain, or tremendous head pain, or suffering with overall muscle weakness, or getting in the bathtub and pouring hot water on their joints because their joints all ache. Okay, and so the mainstream medicine solution is, all these psychotropic drugs, or tranquilize them, put them on something on, some type of benzo that is just going to make them really in pain, but tranquil and convenient for the parents while they're in pain. Okay, so you get all that, and then, and you have, what's next? What's next, Autism Speaks? Are you going to go on, the triple X internet and make autism sex toys? What? What are you going to do? How can you be so insidious to profit off of this industry? I can't. I wouldn't, I'm not God. I don't damn anybody to hell. I couldn't imagine that. Okay. But the opening up this box and submitting my first FOIA request and looking into this, I've never imagined that people could be as evil on such a scale. It's just unimaginable how people can be pure evil and basically be opportunists off of children who were maimed permanently and their lives were changed forever. Okay, and they were put in pain, chronic pain forever. They were put into confusion forever. They were made mute forever. They had sound sensitivity forever. And then you have individuals that will try to profit off of that. Okay, and they will try to charge astronomical amounts of money so you could have some prayer as the individual that has an affected child that is going to have to go to bat with their insurance company so they can at least minimize their cost to some type of copay. So we can go to Autism Speaks online web store so we can get, whatever therapy du jour that they're going to charge you an arm and a leg for. That is just insidious. What do you do? We've gone round and round. I don't believe we don't use mainstream medicine for our son, period. But it's just, it's incredible. What these families go through. What my, down in Auburn, where my twin autistic nieces live, what they go through. I don't even know how they make ends meet. I have no idea. They do what we do in stereo. So, with girls that are menstruating, wow. It's amazing. So. In regarding the congressional hearing that happened in November, that's fine. The Congressional hearings aren't worth a whole lot. This particular hearing, it was well attended. Okay, there's quite a few representatives that were on the committee, and even a few representatives that attended, even though they weren't on the committee, and they're able to attend and comment and ask questions by unanimous consent. Which is usually a formality. So that was great. I am more interested in what happens after. Okay, and if you look at the amount of effort that Representative Dan Burton put into several hearings between 2000 and I may have started in 1999, I can't remember, and then ultimately came up with a scathing report called Mercury in Medicine that was released in 2003, nothing happened. Okay, so I think that it remains to be seen. It's fine that people want to have hearings, and it's fine that this information gets disseminated, okay? We get no traction, period. When you start to question vaccine safety, period, you get no traction in the mainstream media, okay? So it's not like CNN or ABC are going to report on this hearing in a favorable light. Okay. In fact, after this particular hearing, there was a scathing review of the fact that they would question vaccine safety in Forbes magazine. Okay. It was in record time after the hearing. It was up on the Forbes magazine website. Okay. And the individual that, I can't remember the name, was some physician that wrote this scathing editorial about, Representative Issa, Dan Burton, Bill Posey, and their audacity to ask for a unvaccinated study. Okay. And so, and it went on and on and on. And this individual actually had no clue about research. You could really look at what he said. And I did post a comment, there was a comment section, never got a response whatsoever. I tried to, when I post a comment like that and I want a response, I'll put all my credentials up front, right? But so just having a hearing, and I think C-SPAN 3 picked it up or something like that. And, here I am with, sitting on the front row, trying to mind my P's and Q's, sitting close enough to Colleen Boyle that, okay, never mind. I'm not going to say that. but seeing all this, I just don't see that much good in actually having a hearing. I mean, they're fine, but we need action. We need change. It's very slow moving. When you work with anybody within Congress, okay, within the legislative branch of the government, things are going to move so slowly. And every time I think about that, then I think about the 20,000 fetuses per week that are being exposed to 25 micrograms of mercury because their moms are getting the flu shot. Okay. And the doctor is saying, you know what? This is fine. It's fine that it has mercury. It's just a little bit of mercury and it's going to keep the vaccine fresh. And so, I have very few eggs, okay, that I can put in my different baskets. My first priority is my family. And I don't, and I want to preserve time for my family. And so when I look at the different baskets where I put my eggs in, I want things to move quickly. I don't want them to move slowly. And so when you look at Congress moving along like a glacier, okay, we can measure inches per year, and we can actually see that, where we were in 2000, we've really made no headway whatsoever. Okay, there's still thimerosal and vaccines. People are getting away with criminal activities. They're still getting away with it. Vaccine manufacturers are very, very rich. The vaccine schedule is expanding. In that respect, we've probably gone backwards. Okay, so the glacier is moving in the wrong direction. So rather than put those eggs in that particular basket, I am much more interested. I'm not saying that I wouldn't pursue, another the possibility of a congressional investigation or the possibility of the hearing. But I think that there's way, way more lucrative places to put our very, very limited and precious resources, mainly time, mainly sweat equity, than trying to get some congressional official to do something. Okay, even if you get one person. Okay, even if I've been able to meet with Representative Issa 4 times. There's 434 other congressmen that aren't Daryl Issa.